Alfie Manthorpe, welcome to the Without Limits podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited. I don't know when this episode is going to go out, but we are recording basically the first episode of what will be season 3. So this is a big moment for me. It's been a long time coming. And like I say, irrespective of what episodes go out first, this is the start, hopefully, of a big season for me. So thank you very much for joining me. It's obviously under a very special occasion with bringing you down to launch you coming on board as the head of Marchon running. A massive opportunity for our brand, hopefully an opportunity for you and your career as a coach as well as an athlete. And hopefully the start of something that's super successful for all of us. So yeah, I'm excited. And without further ado, my first question is always, what does Without Limits mean to you?
I think for me, Without Limits means that whatever you do in life, you go in with the intent that you can achieve whatever you set out to achieve as long as you have the right mindset and plan behind it. I don't think you should ever set yourself limitations on what you can do. As long as you have a strategy to do it, then you are without limits to a certain degree. Obviously, there's certain factors what can affect that, but I think whatever you do in life, you want to go into it with the mindset of being able to achieve whatever you want, as long as you put the work in.
I love surrounding myself with, people of any ages, but particularly when there's like young, hungry people that are kind of coming up in their sport or in their career, their profession, whatever it may be. And it just reminds me to stay on your game. And I think you're quite a quiet, softly spoken character, quite shy by all intents and purposes, but someone that's been on a bit of a meteoric rise, both through social media, some of the brands that you've been working with, 247, etc. But also for what you've achieved now in the sport over the last couple of years. I think it's very easy for people to see the here and now, and I've talked to this a number of times. People see the here and now, they see this kind of success in the moment and think that it's maybe it's happened overnight. But to get to your level, and I've been running now for quite some time with a bit of intent, but nothing to the extent of what you have. But to get to your level, I've got a real appreciation for just like how much time you must have committed to this. So where did that all start as a runner, and how does someone get to? I know you've called yourself sub-elite, and just before we came on air, but you're an elite runner by all accounts. How do you get to becoming an elite runner? Where does that start?
I probably started a lot earlier than a lot of other good runners now. I think in terms of people who ran when they were really young, it's not that great of a conversion into being a good runner when you're in your 20s or 30s. Generally, I think in the UK, that's just because of the culture of training when you're younger is a bit backwards and a bit different to maybe other countries. But I think across the board, it's normally you start with a different sport like football and things like that, and then build into running as you go. But for me, I kind of ran really young. So 6, 7, 8, I was doing cross country in school, whatever, like year 3, year 4. I grew up watching my family run, and because my mum was pretty young when she had me, she was still running, and I can remember like watching her do races, albeit very few, because I think after I came to the picture, it was a bit of a downhill performance thing from there for her, but I can remember that. And then my grandparents ran, my dad ran, so it was always natural for me to run. And I think maybe because from a young age I was really sporty, I loved doing karate, badminton, football, swimming and running. I was generally quite good at running anyway, because I just did a lot of other sports and the fitness was kind of there. So first few years, at like 11, I was pretty good at running. And then as I sort of transitioned, maybe as more people came into the sport, I instantly started getting worse and worse by proportion. People grew quicker than me. And for quite a few years, I was pretty mediocre at a national level, or compared to what I was maybe when I was 11, when I was one of the best in the country. And then kind of going through the teenage years, and when you're at school, you don't really at that point look at maybe trying to educate yourself a bit more on the sport. So I was just kind of going through the motions, being coached by someone who, looking back, was a terrible coach. And also the nutrition, what I was doing was terrible at the time as well. And I just gradually got worse and worse, again, proportionately in the sport, and I just wasn't improving. And then I think maybe around 18, I started to try and do a bit more, learn a bit more about the sport. And then from there, that's kind of compounded year on year on year. Even though my training has grown, progressed for each of those years, I wouldn't say there's been any massive increases in training since then. It's just been compounding the fitness and building, and maybe where other people have slacked off. People generally at university have to see a dip because of going out and drinking loads. I'm not really into that, so I've just really been fortunate with injuries and illness. That's never really taken too much away from my training. So for the last few years, it's just been building and building. And with that, the consistency, I just keep getting better and better. So it's kind of taken me to a point now where it's kind of been a big step up. And now I guess, I know I did say I was a sub-elite, but I'm kind of transitioning to that elite level at the minute, which is a bit of a long transition and obviously a hard one. But yeah, at this point, it's probably, I'm training like a pro and an elite. So hopefully I'll get there within this year.
There's two bits to pick up on there. One, I think you mentioned there about the sort of culture in British running, starting at a young age and be able to maintain that then into, late teens, early 20s. I've seen a lot of stuff, obviously, the closer I've got into running over the last sort of 2, 3, 4 years, looking at other runners at the elite level and some of these people that are very aspirational, inspirational characters. And yeah, their ability to stay at the top or their lack of ability to stay at the top through issues surrounding largely just like fatigue where they put their body through too much stress, under-fueled, getting fractures in certain places, just like so that is that kind of what you're alluding to in terms of like culturally within running? I think just like keeping an athlete healthy through those formative years.
Yeah, I think especially when I was growing up, it was no education on nutrition from an athlete standpoint. You'd kind of just listen to the coach and go, yes, okay, I'll do that. But most of the time, these coaches, in the UK system at least, it's a lot of volunteers or maybe a lot of people who don't quite have the skill set to actually coach safely and know what they're doing. Yes, you have a coaching qualification, but it's pretty low-level education in terms of what they need to do to complete that qualification. So it kind of just builds up a sort of innate mindset about running, which is generally lighter means faster, which just means you're not feeling as much as you need to. And then also you just got to work hard and push hard. And that's how you get results, which ultimately the combination itself leads to being fatigued, injured, ill, and then it just compounds and compounds. And it's really hard to sustain fitness and sustain being healthy when you're underfueling and overworking. It's not really a great combination, especially as you get older and you get other stresses in your life as well. It's pretty much an impossible combination to stay injury free.
I suppose then in that instance, like the people that kind of get through the other side are naturally the most resilient to sort of the trials and tribulations of trying to get lighter, trying to stay injury free and trying to increase your mileage. And maybe some of the more talented athletes, if they were brought up in a different way, through that system, they may still be, on their game coming into their late teens and early 20s. It's certainly something I've seen, and I think it's quite a mature perspective for you to have as a 25-year-old. So when did the realization of like that was the kind of culture, and I need to maybe just tread carefully around it? How did you have that level of like perspective, or is it only now that you've kind of got it looking back?
It's probably built subconsciously over the years, just from experiences of getting injured myself and maybe speaking to good coaches and high-level athletes. But I'd probably say it came off the back of lockdown because the tracks were closed and we weren't training in groups, it was pretty much we had one session a week and then the rest of it was kind of easy running or tempo or threshold work, never any really strenuous work. And that's actually where I saw a lot of improvements. So in my head, it was like, okay, I'm not training as hard. I'm probably training more, but more relaxed. And I was seeing the biggest improvements I've ever seen. And that was, I'd say, a turning point for me because at the same time, Jakob Ingebrigtsen, who's a Norwegian runner, who's probably, I'd consider the best middle distance or distance runner on the planet, and maybe probably of all time, his training is very much about threshold training and not really going over the edge and really keeping a good control intensity. So just those sort of bits of information and experience I just combined and was like, it is just about how much you can build over time and not just do this fancy session and maybe go, oh, that looks really great on paper, I must be fit. Because at that point, you're probably already too fatigued to take into the next session because you should be saving those efforts for race day. So it was just something that is so obvious looking back, but maybe at the time and growing up, it is really hard to, in hindsight, look at it and go, okay, I should have known that, because why would you, when you think in most other sports as well, it's all about just putting in the work. And like in basketball, for example, you hear stories about how Kobe would just be the first at the gym and the last to leave. In running, if you're the first to start on a run and then last to be running, you'd just get injured and be too fatigued. So it's quite a different mindset shift to other sports because you can't just continue to grind and grind and grind. And I guess maybe that hard work comes into actually the nutrition recovery side of it, which you can kind of do unlimited of, and that's kind of where you've got to put the work in the most.
Yeah, one thing I've kind of learned by spend the kind of bits of time around you, which has been more frequent recently, and obviously the conversations we've had, is there's a lot of athletes that are, have the physical attributes, have the mindset, the mentality, and they're great. They've got all the attributes to be a great athlete. You then get the guys that have got all of that, guys and girls, but then also have this kind of like IQ around the sport and real students of the sport. Again, you mentioned you started very young at 6-7 years old, a family history of runners. What's giving you such I guess just like a keen eye for the detail and following some of these alternative methods of trying to get to the top in a kind of British system that maybe isn't, naturally, that wouldn't be what athletes come into contact with?
I'm pretty obsessive with everything I do. So even if it wasn't running, if it was business related or like social media, I was big on social media, so I was the same there. I researched everything to do with the algorithm, everything to do with when you should post and things like that. And it's just kind of the same with running. So I've gone through so much research over the years, some obviously doing it myself, where I'm reading certain papers about how different scientific methods are in of how they affect fitness down the line, and listening to high profile coaches. I've just been really trying to be a student of the sport. So it's just always been rooted in that, really. I've always wanted to learn as much as possible, and that's kind of led me to a point where you learn things which on paper should be good, and then you try them yourself and see how they convert into maybe how you are as a runner, but also on the bigger picture, because things aren't always the same on paper as they are in actual practice. So it's just really been a trial and error on that front as well. Using myself as a bit of a bit of a guinea pig in that front, where I maybe do some training and I go, okay, maybe that's too much effort, and then take a step back and go, okay, let's try this. And now it's just got to a point where I kind of am confident that what I do is maybe the best for me and probably the best for quite a lot of runners as well. But it's easy to see, just following, I guess, the greats of the sport, or people I'd consider the most knowledgeable or the best in the sport, and just see what they do. And it's not really rocket science from that point. You just kind of copy them and maybe look at it and how you can convert that to an everyday runner, but also then someone like me. And it's quite easy to pick up on the needs of a certain runner and then go, okay, I can adapt this quite easily to you as well.
Yeah, I think not only can you see that with how you're speaking now through your own training, but then also with what you created with that social media page, Track Style, which I know people may or not know the page, but I think I follow it, and I think just as a resource in terms of just like I'll use the word holistic, but just like an overview of everything that's going on in the track and field world or in the running space. I mean, it's such a great resource, and I think when you're so passionate about your own performance, but you're equally as passionate about all these other essentially competitors and athletes in there, and documenting some of the fastest times that are going on in the world at varying different distances, you can see just how immersed you are in kind of running culture and the sport as a whole.
Yeah, and I also think, going back to Tracksters, like with you obviously doing this podcast, you've probably learned so much from the guests you've had on, where I was doing a podcast for like 2 or 3 years with pretty much every week, like interviewing elite athletes and coaches, and you just absorb so much information from those podcast episodes. And doing the research for that podcast episode as well is probably definitely where I've got probably most of my knowledge from over the years.
It's really cool. You've alluded to the sort of 6 and 7, get to 11 years old, one of the best in the country, fall off for whatever reason. Maybe that's to do with kind of maturation rates of athletes at that sort of age. Come back into your 18 years old, and maybe that progress starts to accelerate again because other people are distracted by various other bits and pieces. So I think I've got a kind of a timeline of when it's kind of been a hobby, when it's been more serious, and how that's kind of progressed. But how do you turn a hobby such as running into a profession? And what does that transition look like in actual terms? Obviously, you've alluded to elite level training like professional. What does that look like?
I definitely think you can't chase the aspiration of transition from a hobby to a profession, because I think chasing that fitness or maybe chasing that goal would be detrimental, because you'd always almost have an extra pressure, which would ultimately mean that you probably maybe training too hard, or you're putting too much pressure on yourself, which then psychologically affects it. So for me, and what I'd always say to other people, is you just have to work on being a better athlete than you were last month. And that doesn't have to be necessarily the times you're running. That could just be how your complete training is as a whole, because ultimately running is as close as scientific as you can get. Obviously, there's probably cycling, which is a bit more just pure science, but it is just on paper fitness and then psychology. And as long as you're fresh and healthy, if you've got the higher hemoglobin count and better mechanics, then you'll run faster on race day as long as you're willing to work as hard as the other person. So it's literally, for me, you just break it down to the scientific level and go, this is how I build fitness. This is how I stay injury free, and just work on that month on month on month and just stack the consistency. And that's kind of how you get to a point where it transitions away from a hobby to a profession. Is you have to also have the intent of improving. You can't just go, I've been doing this for 6 months, so I'm going to keep doing it for 6 months and just keep doing it and keep doing it. You maybe have to go, okay, maybe this isn't working very well. This is working well. Let me focus in on the things that work well, carry on doing them, and then also maybe try to look at ways to innovate in the areas that maybe I'm struggling the most and just carry on building. It's just literally a constant building game, really.
I hear you, and I like that, right? Because it comes back to just like trusting the process. Now, luckily for you, the process starts at 6, 7 years old because of external influences of your mum, your dad, and your grandpa, etc. For other people, that they might not start that early, in which case then there's a delay in terms of when they can get started. And trusting the process and building the fitness. You always want to try and ride the line of like doing as much as you can to make sure the progress is as quick as possible for a lot of people. Obviously, then you throw into physical attributes, mental resilience, all those kind of bits and pieces. But at some stage, if someone is just like trusting in the process and trying to turn this hobby into profession, obviously a profession means probably more commercial opportunity from doing the hobby. We spoke about this at the track the other week. You knowing your physical capabilities and limitations around limb length for certain distances, etc. At what stage does someone kind of give up on the dream, or would you suggest someone just holds on indefinitely? There's got to be, given your understanding of this, there's got to be some moments where you can go, do you know what, if I'm not running this time at this age or whatever it may be. Is there any examples of that where people can?
So I think actually maybe until the last 18 months or maybe even the 12 months, I was kind of set that I'm still going to try and be a better runner, but I was almost accepted that I wasn't going to be definitely an Olympic level runner or a professional runner. So I think, unfortunately, I do think it is the long game regardless of the case of maybe if people aren't where they need to be and it's like, well, how can I get there or else I'm just going to quit. Sometimes it is, that might actually take twice as long as the initial goal is. So, I mean, I've definitely had times in my career where that was the case. I wasn't really improving from ages of like 15 to 18, 19 until I changed quite a lot of training, and then there was a massive shift. At the time, you could probably go, there's not really an explanation for that shift, but looking back, there probably was definitely a big change in training. So I do think it's ultimately where people, what expectations they have on their running as a whole or whatever sport there is. And if that's, I want to be a professional athlete, then you've just got to kind of do it indefinitely. And you might make it, you might not, but even if obviously you can't drop everything to do it if it's not working, because at certain points, and that's why I built a social media presence, and that's why I was working on a few other things, was because it's not really having a backup plan, but it's making sure you can continuing to have that athletic endeavor. So I had to, get a job, do other things, side hustles and everything like that, just to make sure I could continue to try and train to the best of my ability, because I wasn't sure when the date was going to come that I'd be good enough at running to be able to call it a profession. So yeah, I mean, you've just got to stick at it. Unfortunately, it's quite a long game, and it might never come. So who knows?
What does calling it a profession mean to you in terms of like, what does a professional athlete mean? What's the difference? And I guess just like objectively black and white. Once you're a hobbyist, it's like this is what it kind of looks like, and when you're professional, it looks like this. Because I think it's quite a grey area, right?
Yeah, I guess by true definition, it would be main source of income being out of the sport. I guess a lot of people could also look at it with how much intent you have behind the sport. So my lifestyle is very much structured around running. So obviously after this podcast, I'm going for a run and then having some lunch. I tried to lay in bed as much as possible this morning. So I could have got out this morning and ran, but that means I would have woke up an hour earlier to run then, which wouldn't have been optimal for recovery. So for me at this point, it's pretty much everything in my life revolves around running, or how, even if it's not running on that day, how I'm going to be 2 days from now. So everything I eat, everything I do today will be looking for the next week or the next month of training. Like you can't really slip, and I think that's probably the biggest difference, other than the earning the money aspect. It's just everything has to be dialed to performance and staying healthy, and you can't really slip on that, because that's how performance goes out the window. And when you're relying on those performances, or relying on training being a certain way, or a certain block being of a certain quality to get you to a certain fitness level, you can't really allow it to slip. And that's kind of the biggest difference, I think.
You've alluded to, the side hustles and the ways in which you had to, you have to make ends meet in order to put food on the table and to fund the lifestyle as a pro athlete. And I can completely relate to that. I've also spoke to a number of different athletes, or track and field athletes, or British Olympians, that kind of thing. And I know the sport is quite heavily underfunded for the amount of effort and time it takes, both on the come up in training, and then also even once you quote unquote make it. Obviously, in this day and age, we've alluded to brands that you may be working with and opportunities that can come up for athletes now outside of, I guess, the sport, but the sport is maybe the vehicle that offer those opportunities. What's your kind of perception now on the kind of commercial opportunities for becoming a professional athlete in, let's say running, but I guess just like track and field, or whatever you categorize running as part of?
I would say, I guess, a lot of people out there, if they were like, I want to not fast track, but if they wanted to make it a feasible career path, it would be, obviously the focus is on performance, but how you communicate through social media, your story is definitely the most powerful thing. In fact, I'd say that actually outweighs results and running performance. It definitely helps. Like if I can make a reel about how I ran a 28-minute 10K, it'll certainly get a lot of views. But yeah, I'd say everything right now is on social media. So you see with the influencers, they make considerably amounts, like crazy amounts more money than just a standard professional. And then you kind of have people who overlap, I guess, even in the high rock space, like Jake Dearden, for example. He's obviously one of the best high rockers in the world, but he's also got 600 and something thousand followers, which definitely helps his career more. And then it kind of overlaps as well. So in the running space, you've kind of got people like Philly Bowden, who I don't know whether to call her an influencer anymore, because she's a professional athlete. She's ran 226 marathon. But I believe when she started becoming an influencer, so to speak, she was running a 230 marathon, 232 marathon. And I'd say, and I'm sure she would say as well, in terms of having doors open for her and allowing more time to actually train as an elite athlete, it was actually influencing what opened those doors, and the commercial opportunities she got from social media that actually allowed her to train fully. Even just being able to pay for training camps, being able to have the nutrition you need, being able to have the running shoes you need. It's a massive expense, and there's so many ways to make that easier, and that is generally through having opportunities through social media at the minute. So that's definitely the key.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way to skirt around the fact that being able to make your grow your personal brand and making yourself more commercially viable for brands to be able to support you in your endeavor of being an athlete is super important. I think the athletes that lean into it and that straddle the line really well are the ones that are kind of the superstars in the space, because they're able to marry up their athletic performance with also their ability to communicate and relate and inspire a generation of people. I think there are many people that maybe don't lean into it enough, but I also think culturally, maybe within running, it's something that I guess the coaches of old, or the old school people, probably don't care for it. Mm-hmm. Case in point, they're volunteers in the sport, but you can't train like a professional athlete and not earn any money. So I think it is something that is very important. You've obviously shown your natural I guess connection to wanting to learn about that place, with Trackstar, but also your own social media. Is that something you proactively put time into, and what's the kind of, I guess, the strain on your energy and resource when you are having to eat, sleep, breathe, running? The strain that kind of those extra deliverables, be it socials, they put much strain on it. Are you able to kind of manage and balance both?
Right now, I'd say most of the time it's actually a good balance. I'm not sure if we had this conversation in 6 months, 12 months time, if that would be a better balance or a worse balance. I kind of maybe need to, at the minute I'm in a position where I don't want to say no to any new opportunities, but I'm sure at some point that will change to, I'll have to start saying no to things, because ultimately I've definitely noticed, it's not happened recently, but a few times I've been doing too much travel before a race, or I've been too many places at once, and then you get a bit ill from, not sleeping as much and having to change your training around, or maybe not eating optimally. and it very quickly goes south if you're doing too much of that. So, I mean, it's definitely a trade-off, and you've got to definitely balance that. But it's just kind of with everything, in the sense that I could look at this and go, a year ago I was maybe working a 9-to-5 job and then having to train around that. I'd definitely pick this now. So I'll never really complain, and this is why I'm, I guess, saying yes to everything at the minute, is because what would I rather be doing, and what's actually better for training? It's definitely this option right now. And yes, hopefully in 6 months' time I'll be fortunate enough to have built it up to a point where people are asking me to do things and I have to reluctantly say no. But I guess that's, again, a luxury where I'll be at a point where, okay, now I can focus a bit more on performance because I've got these other things built up as well.
You kind of alluded to that sort of timeline over the last 12 months, and the next 6 months. I think everything you're sort of suggesting could happen a lot quicker, because the landscape of running now is, the opportunity is so vast, right? For people just getting into running, and the opportunities and the low barriers to entry, and the opportunity to be accepted by a certain run club or get into a recreational race. The London Marathon accepting more people than ever before. So the landscape's really exciting as a runner. I suppose it would have to be for me to be giving up so much time for me running as well, right? So what do you think about that running landscape? As someone that's obviously been in it for the last 19, 20 years, this has been a sport that maybe back when you were early 10, 11, 12, all your mates are playing football, running isn't very cool, doing cross country. Now everyone wants to run. What's your kind of thoughts on that?
I think initially it's definitely made it easier to wear half tights to the supermarket after a run, to be honest. I don't feel as weird going into a shop with short shorts on, or a lycra on, to buy some protein shake after a run or something. So that's nice. I've kind of seen both sides of it, where I grew up with the traditional side, where I love watching Diamond Leagues or watching the World Championships or the Olympics. And in that I kind of cross paths or just talk with a lot of traditional runners who maybe would hate the new sort of wave of run clubs and influencing and things. But for me, I love where it's at right now, and its trajectory, what seems to be hopefully growing still, where I think it's just great that people can actually come into the sport and do whatever they want to do in the sport. Because again, going back to what it was like when I was a kid, it was like, you've got to do this, you've got to do this. It's kind of why I don't run the marathon yet, because it's still, I've followed the traditional build of, you do 800 meters, you do 1500 meters, and then you go up to the 3K, and then the 5K, and then the 10K. But you can't run a 10K until you're 18, for example, or you can't race the 5K until you're 16.
Really? Is that kind of the set way of?
There's a few exceptions with road races, but on the track, I don't think I raced a 5K on the track until I was at university.
What do you mean you can't run one? They just say you can't run one?
Yeah, it's just like the common thing where you race 600 meters when you're 11, you move up to 800 meters when you're 13. Obviously, the decision they put those meets on is maybe the governing body who decides that. Obviously, is the structure, depending on which age group you are. But even outside of that, I can't remember ever really having a race where I would have the opportunity to do that. Maybe that was just me not looking, or my mum not looking for those races. But it was definitely, there's a certain stigma about athletes who step up to do a 10K at a young age, or step up to do a half marathon at a young age, or a marathon. And it's just a massive part of the sport, really. You've kind of got to follow this traditional path. Like even Jake Dearden was doing cross country races with me when he was at school, because that's what you did. You did cross country, or you race on the track at short distances. That's basically it. Whereas now you've got people doing marathons when they're 20, 23, which would never happen when I was growing up. You'd see everyone who's a marathon runner in the 30s. So that's definitely changed, which I like, because I don't know why that would ever be the case in the first place, that you couldn't do things until you're a certain age. Obviously, not telling a 16-year-old to go and do a marathon, but I think if you can healthily handle the training, then you should be able to do whatever you want, really, in the sport.
Yeah, nice. Let's talk some like running specifics. Last time we did this was actually with Jake Dearden. You've alluded to sort of training now, post-COVID, a large volume of your training kind of being easy sessions, and you said a few terms. And I also hear runners talk about sessions, and when they talk about sessions, they go, well, I've got 2 sessions this week. They've still got 8 in my turn. They've still got 8 sessions. That's like 8 runs they're doing, but 2 of them are sessions. So just talk to me about running terminology at that elite level. You've got sessions, you've got threshold, you've got easy, you've got tempo, you've got all these different things. Can you just give me a quick breakdown of the lingo so I can be down with the kids?
Yeah, so I guess you class a session as a workout, or I mean, I coach George Heaton as well, and he always calls it speed work or sprints. No matter what it is, if I set him 4x2K, he'll call it sprints. So I'm like, it's not sprints. So yeah, session I'd class as a workout. So most commonly now, that's threshold training, which is in broader terms, half marathon to marathon pace for me. But if I wanted to go down the scientific route, I mean, you've had the testing, it's certain lactate levels and certain paces and things like that. And then the rest of it is kind of just easy running, which is, people would say zone 2, but I'd probably say it's like zone 1.5 for me, or 1. I don't think I'd actually go into zone 2 much on an easy run. I've never really looked at or tracked the zones too much. So I'd just class it as an easy run. And I think a lot of people might get too caught up on the metrics on that. I would say if you can nose breathe on an easy run, brilliant. A lot of people have hay fever or deviated septums as well, though. So if you can hold a conversation on an easy run, I don't think it matters if that's a zone, whatever. Is it easy? And other than that, it's kind of, that's about it really. There's steady, which I'm sure people get confused with. Steady's kind of in between, where it's like not easy, but it's not hard. And people often think steady's easy, but it's not. So there's a few different things with running lingo. It's a bit confusing, but that's kind of the gist of it.
Yeah, I think when we first we sort of set out the running programs last time, we were looking at all the terminology of like, easy runs, recovery runs, long runs, tempo runs, threshold runs, speed work. It can get quite confusing. But are you saying, just to distill it down into simple terms, like your sessions are threshold work, so tough intervals.
Yep.
And then everything else should be easy runs, and there's different categories within easy running.
Yeah, just to simple it down, that would be the best way to look at it. I think easy and then not easy is probably the easiest way to distinguish it. There's a lot of in between work, like threshold, I'd say, is in between, but it's definitely on the harder side of the effort. The only thing that kind of floats in the middle is steady runs, where people, I guess maybe marathon runners would do that more often, where on a long run they kind of go a sort of a sustained effort, what isn't quite race pace, but a sustained effort, what's not easy either, just to get the heart rate up. But yeah, most of it can be distinguished by easy or running a bit harder. And
people talk about this kind of like 80-20 kind of ratio of like 20% of your training. This isn't just like running specific. I think it's training in general, but 80% of your running is just like easy work. 20% is maybe towards that kind of higher heart rate work where you're working considerably harder. Do you think those kind of general rules of thumb are a good place for people running? Obviously, it's very context dependent, right? If someone's very new to running, I don't necessarily think that their heart rate is their biggest determinant of whether they're going to get injured or ill. It's more to do with their just ability to handle volume or ramp the volume up in a way that's is manageable and it's graded in terms of their exposure to it, more so than like, if they ran 20K at tough heart rate effort, but then the next week they ran 60K at an easy effort, the 60K at the easy effort is probably going to be more detrimental, but just because of the volume and the tissue tolerance and those kind of things.
Yeah, I think just like in, I guess, any sport, if for example in gym, if you were like getting someone going, you go, I can't think of the gym terminology now, so I'll try and think of it as a different example. But yeah, the 80-20 thing works just how you explain it to anyone else new in a sport. Like in football, you'd go, I'll just kick the ball around. That's like me saying 80-20. Whereas if you get to a certain level, you maybe go, okay, it's a lot more intricate than that. You break it down, but it is quite a good starting point. But like you said there, if someone goes and does 80-20 of 30 kilometers, it's a lot different than doing 80-20 doing 100 kilometers, especially when you're new to the sport. It is, I would definitely say for everyone, but especially people who are getting into the sport, it's purely just about fatigue management. And that could be, you might do a 1K really hard, or you might do 2K easy. Probably relatively similar. But if you're not recovering, you could kind of be doing even less than that and still struggle. So it is just purely how much effort and impact am I putting on my body and how am I allowing it to recover? And if they don't match up, then you're going to get injured. It doesn't matter if it's 80-20, it doesn't matter if it's 70-30. If the recovery doesn't match up with the intensity, then that's all that matters.
I think you kind of already alluded to maybe an answer here for this question, but obviously heart rate zone training has become very popular within running, particularly for beginners getting started. A zone 2 effort, go run, and people, my heart rate's gone above zone 2, and I'm like 2 minutes into the run, do I just stop? and the general advice is, run for a bit, walk for a bit, etc. But I think you've kind of made it actually a little bit easier for people. It's like the conversational pace or the nasal breathing pace, that kind of thing. What do you think of zone training with heart rate and things? Is it helpful for and we're talking beginners here, right? Because I think they're the ones that probably get the most confused about this.
I think it can be helpful, but I also think it could be detrimental purely because it's determined on the trackers of the heart rate and also determined on how you set those zones. So unless you've had a test done in a lab, how do you truly know what those zones are? Yes, there could be a rule of thumb out there, but then there's a difference between running. That is quite a fine window between running easy enough and then running too hard. So if that's not accurate in the testing, then it's irrelevant. And then also that the same applies to the tracker. If it's a wrist heart rate monitor compared to a chest strap or an arm strap, it's even 10 beats per minute is going to be a massive difference, or could be a massive difference in effort. So I think it does help new people maybe visualize how they should be training, but ultimately the quicker people can learn to know their body and their efforts, it's the number one priority. Like sometimes heart rate can be high because you're fatigued. Sometimes heart rate can be too low because you're fatigued. It's never an exact science of telling you how you are. Like I've had sessions where I'm absolutely dying. My body feels terrible and my heart rate's not even scratching the first threshold. And I've had times when I feel great and my heart rate's really high. It doesn't always line up. So I think tracking zones, even though it can be good, especially for new people, it's not the end goal for sure. It should be getting used to the effort.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think actually over the last decade, we've seen wearables and tech and data infiltrate people's training with a lot of net positive outcomes for people. But I think people lose kind of the intuition around how you're actually feeling. And I think, again, if we come back to this like journey-centric approach to training from 6 years old to 25, as you've been with running, me for 20 years of training, like actually understanding how you feel in a given day and that be able to direct. I mean, sometimes you just got to get your head down and work hard, right? Because the session or the training phase demands it of you. But for the most part, if people can start to auto-regulate a little bit in terms of how they're feeling, and they play the long game and stretch out that time horizon for what success should kind of look like. Appreciate there might be races in the calendar and stuff. I think people maybe will be able to stay in the sport and stay in the training for a considerable more amount of time and then see the fruits of their labor later in the line, rather than, I guess, it goes back to the trust in the process that we talked about earlier. We've touched on a number of things of where people go wrong, and I think the main thing to fall out of that is trying to run too quick the whole time. Is there anything else? I think one thing that's been a good realization for me, obviously you're now coaching me with Berlin over the last couple of weeks. A lot of the times you have prescribed times, like for me they would be really slow, where actually I'm just like, I'm not necessarily worried about running slow because of my fitness. I'm more worried about slow because of the comparison syndrome of what other people deem as like acceptable pace to be running at now. But again, going back to the data and people sharing stuff on social media, which I should just not really think about because it's not really my concern, but it is something that kind of comes in. But is there any areas you think where people are going wrong now with running?
Comparing to other people, it's definitely one for sure. The other two I'd probably say is choosing their running shoes not very wisely, and underfueling is or under recovering, I guess, as a whole thing, but predominantly underfueling as well. They're probably the top few.
Let's fueling is actually one of the questions I have here. So let's talk about sort of the key kind of hallmarks of what good fueling might look like.
So it's going back to this. It's just a science game. It's calories in and out. It's very hard to be in a calorie deficit and run for a sustained period of time, purely because so much time so much energy has to go into recovering from a session and also doing it, that if you aren't having the sufficient calories in, then something's not going to, either you're not going to be able to train well or you're not going to be able to recover well, probably both. And eventually that'll lead to injuries and illness. So it's not really sustainable. Obviously, naturally, you're probably going to be in a bit of a calorie deficit if you are starting training and maybe you're not eating crazy amounts of food, and naturally you will lose a bit of weight. But if you're in like a forceful calorie deficit, like you're really trying to reduce calories and train a lot, then that's just a recipe for disaster. So I think really, I mean, I don't personally track my food down to the the grams of certain protein and carbohydrates, because I've just done it for so many years that I just kind of know what I'm putting in my body. And also I don't really like the thought of, if I go on holiday somewhere, I'm not weighing out the food, and I just need to know how much I'm putting in. So for me, I guess if people do want to track the calories, how many calories they're expending during a session, and also the maintenance calories, and then also the recovery calories, and just try and match that for starters, and then break that down into carbohydrates and protein. I think ultimately, as much as people like fasting as a whole now, in terms of, I guess, the benefits and health benefits fasting can have, if you're doing fasted training, I wouldn't recommend that at all. If it's over 60 minutes, for sure, I would never go into it fasted. I'd definitely always make sure you've got some carbohydrates, because your body, when running, will utilize carbohydrates or fats, and without those, then it's just going to be instant fatigue, or not instant fatigue, but you're going to be more fatigued than if you did fuel, and that is just going to carry on into the next day and the next day and the next day. And it just goes back to running is just purely compounding fatigue and how you limit that. So carbs pre and post is always a must for me. So, I mean, I eat crazy amounts of food, so I'm maybe not the best example because I've also got a few blood sugar problems, but I'd definitely say I don't want to go into grams per kg and things like that, because it's far too much to unpack. But just make sure you're eating before and after is a good starting point. So before a session, I might have a bagel and then a banana, and then during the session I'd sip on a carb mix or a gel, and then after the session I'd make sure that gel or carb mix is finished, and then I'd try to get in a recovery shake as soon as possible after that as well. So that'd be a split of protein and carbs as well. And then, as well as that, every single meal I have has to have carbohydrates and protein in. Usually that's porridge with milk for breakfast, or maybe porridge with a protein shake for breakfast. Snacking throughout the day with carbs again, and then lunch I try to get some pasta, or pasta and chicken in, or pasta and egg with some fish, and then for dinner it'd be the same, so pasta and meat again. I do really try to stay on top of carbs and protein, and then I think, especially with a Western diet, the fats and the salts and things like that come in naturally as well, and then also electrolytes first thing in the morning as well. It's kind of
I think that's really, really solid advice. I think from a training perspective, outside of the race week or the race itself, that those general rules of thumb are really strong. You know, protein and carbs at most meals. I think definitely bracketing carbs heavy pre and post training is super important. Something I've definitely noticed as the running volumes ramped up. Coming into sort of, let's use the marathon as an example, because we need some absolutes to be able to answer questions. If we've got the marathon as an example, is there a particular sort of carb loading strategy you have? Something that I use with Liam this time round, actually. So he likes to make sure that the carb load is so race day, not race day +1, but race day -2. So not the day before, the day before that, and the day before that, and sort of splitting that carb load over that day. And I think I was at around 9 grams per kilo of body weight in terms of carbohydrate for those days. So if I was racing on the Saturday, we're talking the Wednesday and Thursday. And then the Friday would then be at like a sort of 5-6 grams per kilo body weight. And then the race day itself in the morning would be the same sort of 5-6 grams. Is there any difference there that you might look at? And again, once I actually spoke to Philly about fueling and stuff for the marathon, because I was with her in Mykonos a few days after the London Marathon. And it was very apparent that obviously you guys put a lot of effort and thought into your running, but it's less important for you guys at that end, because mechanically you're so efficient to be able to run and cope with the demands of a 42K race. Whereas for us that maybe don't have that general physical preparedness for that, it's like fueling and all those kind of stuff become super important. Otherwise we will bonk.
Yeah. I mean, fueling, even mechanical differences aside, fueling for a 2-hour race is different than fueling for a 3, 4, 5-hour race. I probably follow the same strategy, really. If you're racing on the Sunday, the carbo load start on the Thursday. If you're racing on the Saturday, carbo load start on the Wednesday. I mean, I think your last podcast, Jake was on, and he was talking about how many carbs he has, especially in a race, and it's really high on the numbers. I think
I was going to come on to that. Is there the sort of part 2 to that question was then in race, again, people are talking about 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour, etc. And again, there's nuance and context to each individual. I think Liam, my head nutrition, put out a post the other day about some cyclist that's hitting 200 grams per hour, which is quite frankly crazy. But yeah, let's answer the I think you've answered the carbo load bit. Is there anything during race? I know you've not ran a marathon yet, but what would your fueling strategy be for that?
So I would look at the first gel in 25 minutes in, gel on the start line, gel 25 minutes in. Whether that would be, it depends on the gel content. Some are 40 grams, some are 20 grams, 25 grams. It's quite a different variety of gels there. It's not really, doesn't matter too much as long as the gel is good on the stomach. You can kind of, if you have to take 2 gels in one go, take 2 gels to reach it. I mean, as a bare minimum, I'd love to be able to recommend 1 gram of carbs per minute of run. Obviously, you don't take it like that, but if you're running for 4 hours, you need to try and get in at least, I guess, 240 grams of carbs in that 4-hour window. I would like to push that further. I mean, Jake mentioned he probably has 90 to 100 grams, right? He is a bigger runner, so it's a bit easier, I guess, or I guess his target would be higher just because he's burning more carbs because of his weight. But I would definitely say that needs to be a goal of trying to push that in the training as well, because it's easy for me to go, you should be taking 90 grams an hour, but if in the training you've been practicing with 30 grams an hour, changing that for race day is going to be far too much. You're just going to have gastric issues as well. So yeah, I would try to shoot for at least a gram of carb per minute of run and break that into the race. So maybe 30-minute windows, 25-minute windows, and then play around with caffeine as well from halfway. But there's so many variables into it depending on weight and how long you're running for and your fitness level and how much. Again, someone running maybe a 6-hour marathon, you can't say have 100 grams of carbs an hour for 6 hours. That definitely starts to reduce as well. So there is quite a lot of variables there, but I'd probably say it's more carb heavy than you think.
Yeah, I think it is a super difficult question to answer because there's so much nuance to it. I think that's a nice way to sort of end that bit. Is just there's so much, you need to eat more carbs than you anticipate, and that's certainly a realization I've had the more I've kind of got into it. Like I think back to my first marathon. You were alluding to running for 2 hours. I'm definitely not running for 2 hours. It was alluding for running for 3 hours something, and maybe carrying 4 gels with me, across that, and thinking that's a lot of gels. And then the latest marathon, I think I fueled really well from a carbohydrate perspective, carrying sort of nine gels or whatever it was. One thing I fell short in with this marathon in London because the heat was the electrolytes. But again, I think there's so much nuance around loading in terms of salts there. So we'll move past that, and again we're moving on to a question in terms of specifics now with running volume through the week, or how we comprise a running program for 5, 10K, half marathon. Appreciate there's a lot of context that goes into that too. You're going to program for yourself very differently. How you program for me, how you program for Sam. But let's just say the everyday runner, is there any rules of thumb when you're training for a 5K, and how does that change when you're training for a 10 or a half or a full?
So I think if you are a runner who is slower than, let me try and think, 15 minutes for a 5K, which I assume is practically everyone in the world, basically, right? Volume is always
15 minutes for a 5K. Go on.
I was just trying to get an arbitrary number. What was like maybe the transition between just fitness and then the need for mechanical fitness as well. Because obviously when you start running sub 3-minute kilometers, it's fast as well as needing fitness. Like you've got to be able to run fast as well. But I'd say for the vast majority of people out there, it's 100% the focus should be on the aerobic side of it. And that is actually, if you're training for a 5K, a lot of work slower than 5K pace. And if you're training for a 10K, a bit more work at 10K pace, but again, still quite a lot slower than 10K pace. So I'd say for most people out there, if you're looking at a week, I would say you'd probably look at starting to try and increase that volume as a whole. And that would just be follow the classic 10% increase, no more in a week. And then every 4th week, have a down week where you kind of have the reset of the mileage you did at the start of those 4 weeks. So quick maths, if you're doing 20 kilometers a week, week 2, you might do 22. Week 3, you might do 24, 25. Week 2, you might do 24, 25. Week 3, you might do 26, 28. And then week 4, you'd go back down to 20 again. So I would recommend most people out there trying to find ways to increase volume. And with that, you kind of have to break down the week into making sure that you can sustain that volume increase. And that comes down to your recovery, but also comes down to how hard you push your sessions. And I would say if you're maybe following a traditional, people like to do 12-week blocks quite a lot of the time. Obviously, for a marathon, you might want to do 12 to 16, but for a 5K, 10K, 12 is definitely a good amount. I would look at, for the first at least 6 weeks of that block, a lot of that focuses on building that aerobic base. So predominantly the intervals would be more at threshold pace, which I guess for a lot of people out there would be half marathon pace. Something, I mean, again, it depends what your starting point is. If you're starting at 100 kilometers a week, you look at doing 12, 14K of volume in one interval session. Whereas if you're doing 20 kilometers a week, I'd still try and prioritize the interval in the long run session. And maybe not as much running in the easy runs, but that session, you may be looking at 4 times 2K, 3 times 2K, 5 times 2K at around half marathon pace with, let's say, 2 minutes jog recovery. And then you do whatever you need to do to get to the next session. So that could be an easy run. That could be going on the cross trainer because you can't handle mileage. It's very much individual. But I would just say these easy runs and easy cross training or doing gym, for example, is all just to making sure that you're fit and healthy to be able to do the harder work as well. And then I'd probably look for most people doing a long run session at the weekend, just to people generally have a busy work life. And so finding time on the weekend to have a bit of a harder effort leaves you more time to focus on fueling and get out the door for a bit longer. So that would look at, again, half marathon pace, where even if you train for a 5 or 10K, a lot of that work is done at a slower pace. Again, could be a fartlek session, a tempo session. And as you get towards closer to the race time, I'd add in a bit more race pace and a bit faster than race pace. I love doing strides as well, or some 200 meter reps, 400 meter reps at faster than race pace. And just trying to, again, build that sort of roundedness, is that a word? Where you can run faster, which then ultimately will make race pace feel easier as well. And then throughout that whole block, also doing strength training, maybe doing plyometrics, but again, that kind of goes back to what kind of runner they are initially as well, how much impact they're currently doing and what they can handle, because there is, again, a lot of nuance around that side of things.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I think shameless plug to the Marchon Run department. Over time, all these programs for varying different levels will be available. So yeah, they'll be able to find them there. One thing I found with, I guess, the running, and I suppose it's part of my identity now, and I love doing it. When I'm locked into the marathon, I know what the goal is. I know what the training looks like because I'm kind of locked into a program. Post-marathon, there's obviously this kind of like, there's this down period naturally because you've got to allow for recovery, but there's also like this ambiguity around and I need kind of order in every part of my life. If the program's not there, so let's take me as an example. Post-marathon, I don't have another marathon coming up. What is the maintenance dose of running? Or do I just get back out there and just run on feel and run for enjoyment?
I think it's completely fine if you do a marathon and go, okay, that's me until my next big goal. I'm just going to, people might even do absolutely nothing at all. Obviously, it's not optimal. But if someone just goes, okay, I've just done a 16-week marathon block, I'm going to rest for 2 months and then plan another race in the later stages of the year and do another 16-week block, go for that, sure. But if I was you, well, I am coaching you, so I guess I'll use that as an example. Most of the time, I would focus on, I want to maintain some fitness level, so then I can attack another block as well, maybe at a higher starting point than I was at the previous block. By all means, have however much recovery you need after a race to get your body fresh again, because I think the main thing is post-race, getting into training again once you feel good to get into training again. There's no point carrying the race fatigue of a marathon, especially into the next training block or into whatever training you're doing, because that's just going to stay and stick around for longer. And you probably, the highest chance of getting injured is probably post-race, because your body's not feeling great and then you want to jump back into it and there's too many, I guess, things what could go wrong. So I would try to go, definitely at least have a maintenance of maybe definitely just getting out the door and easy running, just to keep that aerobic fitness and having your body used to still taking the impact, because I think that's the biggest thing you lose maybe is your resistance to handle the load of running. So if you have 4 weeks off running and then try to get back into it straight away, it's going to be pretty painful on the joints and the body to handle that. So, I mean, if you get out the door 3 times a week, just getting out and running, I think that's definitely a lot better than doing nothing at all, even if that's just 20 minutes of running each day. Optimally, I'd say maybe going back to the 80-20 rule, if you can get an interval session in a week just to take over as well, to get your body keeping used to that stimulus of running a bit harder, and then just getting out the door again, going easy in one day, and then maybe one of those days going longer. that's probably the perfect combination post race before the next big training block.
Yeah, again, I think rules of thumb are very hard to sort of give people, but I think that sort of 3 runs a week, again, depending on what other kind of cross training and aerobic work they may be doing, but 3 runs a week, 1 long, 1 easy, and 1 maybe interval basis is kind of a nice dose. And that kind of leads into my next question, which was I guess the key things to consider with the maintenance dose of running, which is kind of tagged to the question about post marathon sort of training volume and running. I think the reason I asked that is because there's a lot of people now that are crossing over from sort of strength training into running. And we'd love a lot of runners to cross over, equally into strength training, which is part of what the Marchon Run department is kind of, designed to do. But for the people that cross over from strength training into running without a running specific goal, and I don't think the goal needs to be there, because I actually think the goal takes away part of the enjoyment of beginning to explore running more and running further and even running faster. But I think we've answered it with the maintenance dose being like try to put in the kind of the very least the 2 runs of intervals and an easy.
Yep.
And then as you get a little bit more serious, more time on feet, then with a long run, potentially at the weekend. Is that solid?
I would say people transitioning from strength to running, I wouldn't even think about interval sessions until you can at least go out for an easy 10K and not really think about it too much, just because there's so much more to be gained doing an easy run and building that up than getting out and doing a hard session when your body's probably not even used to running easy yet. So definitely just build that up first. That's
really, really strong advice. We've talked about fueling for the runner, so I can move past that one. We've talked loosely about data. Again, just to sort of wrap up on the data piece, because I do think everyone is obsessed over it. The amount of messages I get about what's the best watch to track this and heart rate straps and all this kind of stuff. Like, what is your view on it? And again, I think people are impatient to getting better at running, and I think you want to be able to track that you've ran for 60 minutes, because just going out and running for 60 minutes without any data of time, you might end up running for a lot longer or a lot shorter. But do you think data has a place in the kind of recreational runner, and what point does it become super important?
It definitely does. I mean, at the bare minimum, I would say, well, it's not really a bare minimum, but ideally, you'd be able to have a GPS watch where you can track your time and distance, just purely so you can keep track of what you're doing. Because even if you go, well, I'm going to do this loop, and I'll do the same loop tomorrow, and then the same loop next week, even though it is, so to speak, the same loop, it's kind of good to be able to know how fast did you run it that day, how long did it take, maybe how roughly where your heart rate was and things like that. That is good to know. So it's always more information the better, I guess, especially to just inform your decisions on maybe if you're training too hard or not. You can obviously just go off how you feel, which is fine. But I would say it is probably optimal to have some sort of system to be able to look back on, especially. So say if you are doing the same routes, you can go, well, last month I was doing it at this pace, at this effort, and now I'm doing it at this pace and this effort. And then you can go, okay, maybe my cadence has changed a bit. So a GPS watch, again, can track cadence, running power, or a good GPS watch can anyway. And you can go, okay, so it's really easy to then identify areas of improvement that I think might not actually mean too much on paper, but ultimately will keep you motivated for one, but also keep you accountable to maybe areas where it also might have dipped. So for example, I wear this all day, every day, so it can also track heart rate when I sleep. I know that if my heart rate or HRV is a certain area, or if my heart rate's higher than normal, my resting heart rate, then something's probably gone wrong, or something is going to go wrong with fatigue. So having that data to track even outside of running is really helpful as well, especially, like I said, resting heart rate when you're sleeping. If that's elevated or going up and up, then you probably need to cool off it. And that's probably the biggest thing a lot of runners could probably pay attention to.
Yeah, nice. I think it's, you hit the nail on the head there. It's what you do with the data and actually informing a decision and making sure the decision is the right one rather than ignoring it. Moving into the kind of final bits, mate, obviously bringing on board as a coach. I know you've been coaching for a number of years with varying levels of intent with online clients that you've got and maybe just like helping people out. What part does coaching play in, I guess, the identity of who Alfie is as an athlete?
It's always been quite a big part of me as a runner, because even before I was coaching people, so to speak, I'd always try to help people as much as possible, whether that was advice they'd asked for, or advice I just felt like I should say anyway. I'm not too sure, because there's definitely a lot of times where I've probably just been speaking people's ears off when they didn't even care to listen.
I think that's actually the sign of someone who is a great coach. You know, seeing something that fundamentally they maybe feel as though they could improve or optimize, and being willing to share it, I think is that's a sign of someone who's gifted in that area.
Yeah, I mean, selfishly, I do like seeing that happen. You know, if you are coaching someone and you see them improve, or you maybe go, I could definitely change that, and it'd help a lot. It's always quite a nice feeling to be able to, maybe it's an ego boost where it's like, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing, I can help them, kind of thing. So I do like just looking at that, and you know, I also get joy out of just stripping training back and going, okay, this is what we do now. I mean, I even coach a few high rocks athletes. I don't do high rocks. But on paper, I know what fitness is, and on paper, I know how that translates across different events. So for me, it's just really interesting to always go, well, how can we optimize that for that person? How can we optimize that for this person? I guess it's just like anyone doing any sort of challenge. It's interesting, it's a challenge, and I kind of enjoy doing it. And I think that's kind of what I've always felt. And going back to what I said earlier, I am obsessive with things. And whether that's my training or other people's training, I always try to really find the right balance for them. And it's almost a sense of accomplishment if you get them to do their goal on race day as well. So yes, I just love it, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think when I first started chatting to you actually on Instagram, it's something I kind of noticed your passion for both the sport but also coaching, because of the questions and things you were asking me. And I think as the stars have aligned now, being able to bring you into what we do. And we've always prided ourselves on trying to build the best coaching team in the world, and having just that resource now around running and be able to tap into your brain, and also seeing the running community within Marchon grow is something I'm very excited for. My last bit for you, mate, is just what are the future goals as an athlete? Big picture thinking. Put your flag in the ground. What's the goal?
The easiest and obvious answer is the Olympics in LA, and then the Olympics after that. I'm not quite sure what that is, but hopefully the next 2 Olympic cycles in the marathon would be a massive goal for me. Maybe 2036 as well. It depends how my body's doing at that age.
What distances?
Definitely the marathon. The 10K and the 5K at the minute is.
I love you've not yet run a marathon, but the goal is to run a marathon in the Olympics.
Yeah, it's not even that far away now, is it? 3 years. It's need to get moving a bit with the distance. No, I'm definitely more prepared. My body is more suited to the marathon, and my training, I like doing the aerobic stuff a lot more. So the marathon makes the most sense, and also the 10K standard at the minute is 26:52, and I think 13:01 for the 5K. So it's crazy times to run. So that is definitely one, but it just goes back to I want to just be what I was saying about trying to be the better runner each month. That's all the goal I really care about, is because as long as I know that I can do that, and know that I'm training better than I was, or training smarter, or hopefully both, and running a bit faster, or I'm a bit stronger in the gym, which then translates to running all my cores better, which translates to running efficiency. That is my goal. It's just to get better, and it's kind of all I really care about to some degree. Like, obviously, I'd love to make the Olympics, and it's my full intention to make the Olympics. But if I can go in 4 years' time, okay, I'm a much better runner than I was 4 years ago. That's kind of all I really care about.
That is a without limits mindset, mate. So I think we'll close it there. Alfie Manthorpe, I'm so excited for you to join, for you to be joining Marchon, and I'm very excited to be coached by you as well. Thanks very much, mate.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be a part of it.